So in today's video, I'll be ranking different types of metric that you can use in order to measure your training. Now, if you're new to cycling, I'm sure you have heard a lot of different ways, a lot of different types of jargon in order to measure and track your training. But specifically for today's video, I'll be taking a few of the more common ones and actually ranking them in different tiers to see how effective they are in benefiting your training, and of course, secondly, how practical they are. So I'll be ranking them based off of different tiers. So we have S tier being the best, A, B, C, D, and D being the worst. Okay, so make sure to stay till the end of the video to find out what are the different types of metric that you can use, how good are they, and also make your prediction on which one would I put at S tier. So make sure to stay till the end of the video to find out. Okay, so the way to find out what metrics they can actually track on a Garmin is that on a Garmin you can go into the settings page, and in the settings page you can find data fields, tons and tons of different fields for you to look, for you to know. So I'm going to be going through a few of the more common ones, and so the first one that we have on the list is cadence. Now cadence is basically referring to your revolutions per minute, so how fast your cranks are turning. Now if you have a cadence sensor on your bicycle, you have an integrated power meter, then you will be able to read this cadence reading. Now practicality wise, I would say this cadence number is a pretty good one to track, because there is not much variable that can actually come into play and mess that number up, because unless you have a faulty cadence sensor, there is not much that can actually affect this number, because what you see on your Garmin, your RPM, the number, is a direct representation of how fast your cranks are spinning. And so practicality wise, I would say pretty good. I'll give it a 4 out of 5, because what you see is what you get. And in terms of how it can benefit the training, I'm sure some of you out there have heard of low cadence and high cadence training. And so what that means is that basically if you pedal at a slower cadence, you're still activating the same muscle group, but then you're activating in a different way, because you're pedaling so slow, you're forcing your muscles to produce a lot of strength, right? And then if you pedal at a higher cadence, still the same muscle group, but you're forcing them to fire quicker. So in terms of how it can benefit your training, I would say it's good. I'll give it a 3 out of 5, but apart from that, there's not much you can do about it in terms of cadence training. So because of that, I will rank this cadence in B tier. Good, pretty good, a good start, but not the best yet. So next up after cadence, we have calories. Now I believe this metric is one of those very few overrated metrics that newer cyclists tend to use, especially if they come into the sport, they are looking to lose weight. I think this is one of the very few first metric that they look into whenever it comes to tracking their training or tracking their rides. Now I would say this calorie measurement that you see here on your Garmin, you see it in your Strava after your ride, is just a rough estimate of how much calorie you have actually burned. Because don't forget that every person, every individual have different metabolism rate. Someone who is smaller might have a lower metabolism rate, someone who is heavier maybe can burn calories quicker. And so that is why just because you complete one ride and it says that you have burned 1000 calories, 500 calories, it's just a rough estimate. The actual numbers can be lower or higher depending on your size, metabolism rate, and those kind of things. And so that is why practicality wise, unfortunately, I'm gonna have to give it a 2 out of 5. It is a number that is good to see after your ride, but again, something that I wouldn't prioritize first, and something that it's a measurement that you can't do much with. And again, in terms of how it can benefit your training, yeah, you can organize tougher rides, longer rides, so that at the end of the day you can have more calories burned. But don't forget that when you come off the bike, when you get on with your daily activities, your daily lifestyle, you are actually still burning calories, and that is something that your Garmin will not track. So I will just give it, again, same 2 out of 5. Because of that, 2 out of 5, 2 out of 5, I'm gonna rank this borderline C tier. Okay, next up from calories, we have distance. Again, I think distance is one of the very few overrated metrics that I'm pretty sure almost every cyclist use to track their training. And I'm sure one of the most common way you heard is that, oh, I'm gonna track my weekly mileage using distance, right? Practicality wise, I would say distance is pretty good because this is a metric that is pretty similar to Cadence. What you see on your Garmin is pretty much a direct representation of what you do it. You know, 50 kilometers is 50 kilometers. There's not much variable to change that 50 kilometers. But again, one very important point that I mentioned in the previous video is that just because you cycled 50 kilometers doesn't mean that it is the same 50 kilometers with another person, and doesn't mean that it's the same 50 kilometers that you did last week. Because in cycling, it's different from running. In cycling, we have equipment that comes into play, we have terrain that comes into play. And so practicality wise, I'm gonna give this a 4 out of 5 because it is pretty good. Not much variable that can affect this number, unless if you have a broken GPS or a broken speed sensor, then you're getting inaccurate results. But in terms of how it can benefit your training, as I mentioned just now, it's just not a very accurate way to measure your effort level, because as I said, drafting, terrain, your equipment, all this can come into play. And so that is why when I hear someone say that, you know, they're gonna track their weekly mileage, or I'm gonna do 150k this week, 200k next week, yeah, it's good, but in that 150k and in that 200k, what are you actually doing in the 150k and that 200k? You know, are you sitting behind a motorbike? Are you going uphill, downhill? If you're going uphill, it's gonna be much more intense. If you're drafting behind someone, it's gonna become easier. And so in terms of benefiting your training, I would say I'll just give it 3 out of 5 because good, but it's not a very accurate representation of your effort level. It can be used if you are new to cycling, or maybe you're just a leisure cyclist. Then I would say, yeah, distance is a pretty good way to track your training. But if you're looking to take it to a next level, then there are better metrics to use to track your training. And so because of that, I will rank this distance in C tier. Good, but not very effective. Okay, so next up we have elevation. So this basically refers to how much you have gained in terms of elevation, or how much you have lost in terms of elevation from sea level. And in Strava, after you have uploaded a ride, you completed a ride, most likely you see a measurement there saying your elevation gain. So what that means is that basically it takes how much elevation you have gained from your starting point. So let's just say you have climbed 5 meters. They do not take into account the descent, but if you were to go back up the same climb again and gain another 5 meters, they will add all that up together, and hence you get 10 meters. So again, elevation gain is very similar to distance. And so that is why practicality wise, I will give it the same as distance, 4 out of 5. Every meter that you gain is basically a direct representation of how much you have climbed, but what it doesn't tell you is that how steep it is, duration, distance, things, those kind of stuff. And so that is why when it comes to using elevation to track your training, I will give the same command as the distance just now. Good, not a bad way to track your training, but it's just not a very accurate way to measure your effort level, because don't forget, in the climb you could be going slower, you could be waiting for someone, or you know, you could be going full gas, could be steep, those kind of things. So that is why I think it's just a very generic way to track how many meters you have actually climbed, but it is not an accurate representation of your effort level. I'll give it the same rating as the distance just now, and hence that is why I'll rank it in C tier as well. Okay, now we're getting into one of the more juicier types of metric that you can actually use to track your training, and that is heart rate. Practicality wise, I would say heart rate is a little bit, I'll give it a slightly lower rating compared to cadence, distance, elevation that I mentioned just now, because for this one I'm gonna have to give it a 3 out of 5, because for heart rate there's just too much variable affecting it. You know, if you measure it on your wrist, it's gonna be different compared to, you know, measuring with a chest strap. Your fatigue level, how much sleep do you get, is gonna affect your heart rate. What you eat, the time of day that you train, whether in the morning or evening, is gonna affect your heart rate. You can be going pretty hard today and your heart rate is showing 170 beats per minute, but tomorrow you come back and do the same effort level, it could be showing 168 beats per minute. And so that is why, yeah, pretty good. Practicality wise, there's just a bit too much variable affecting it, and that is why I'm giving it a 3 out of 5. Now in terms of how this can benefit your training, I would say it's a lot more effective compared to distance and elevation and cadence that I mentioned just now. Because for this heart rate, if you were to do a 20-minute FTP test, apart from taking your 20-minute power, you can actually simultaneously take your 20-minute lactate heart rate as well. So what that means is that basically you can figure out the different zones of your heart rate. So zone 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And so what that means is that basically when you go out to ride, if all you have is a heart rate monitor, you can always make sure that you stay in zone 4 and to make sure that your effort level is somewhat constantly maintaining that zone 3 to zone 4. Now one thing that I would say with heart rate training is that as you get fitter and fitter, your numbers are not going to change a lot, because if you go hard today at 180 beats per minute, 2 to 3 months down the line as you get fitter and fitter, if you were to go hard again, it will still be at the same 180 beats per minute. When you're going hard, your heart rate is going to rise. It's not going to change. But what is changing is that you're going faster, you're getting more powerful, and your speed and power changes. And that is what is different when you get fitter and fitter. And so that is why I'm going to rank this heart rate in B tier. Pretty good, can be quite effective when it comes to tracking your training, but not as effective as some of the other ones that I'm going to mention. Okay, so next up we have speed. Now speed is pretty much self-explanatory. It's basically how fast you are going. And again, practicality wise, I'll rank it the same as 4 out of 5 as the cadence, distance, elevation, those measurements, because there's not much variable affecting it apart from maybe your position. If you have a faulty speed sensor, faulty GPS, something like that, then you might have a faulty speed reading. But apart from that, it's pretty reliable, pretty practical. Basically how fast you're going. It's basically how fast you're going. Self-explanatory. And in terms of how this can benefit your training, the way I look at it is pretty much quite similar to heart rate. There are variables that affect it, things like wind, your position, the aerodynamics of your bike. All this can affect the outcome of your speed. But one thing that I quite like about speed compared to a heart rate is that if you were to measure your average speed for a segment or a certain stretch of road, it's a pretty good way to track your progress, measure your speed, whether or not have your average speed improve. And so that is the one thing that I like compared to heart rate, because again, as I mentioned just now, for heart rate, even if you get fitter, you come back 2 to 3 months, you get fitter, it's still going to be the same 180 beats per minute. It's not going to change just because you get fitter. So because of that, I'm going to rank this speed in A tier. Pretty good, pretty effective, can be used to track your training. And so another measurement that is pretty similar to speed is your time. Now this one, practicality wise, pretty self-explanatory. Time is time. Now in terms of how this can benefit your training, I quite like this time because the way I look at it is the same way as the speed just now. Track your time over a certain stretch of road, and then you can see whether or not your time has improved. But also one more thing time can give you is that it is able to track your training hours, and that says a lot, because if you are able to track your training hours, then what that means is that you are also able to track your volume as well, and that is a very crucial element when it comes to planning out a proper training plan, your volume and your intensity. I like to track my weekly training hours to see how many hours that I'm putting in that are actually effective, quality hours. I make sure that every hour that I put in is actually me doing an effort and not just me coasting around downhill, things like that. So I'll rank this in A tier, good, effective, and can be used to track your training. Pretty good. And so here comes the most important metric of the day, and I'm sure many of you, if you have been watching my previous video, I'm sure you can guess it already, is power. Now again, practicality wise, I will rank it just the same as the cadence sensor, the speed sensor just now. And the only way this can be inaccurate is if you have a malfunctioning power meter, if you have a power meter that is uncalibrated, no batteries, then that is where you can have inaccurate readings of power. But apart from that, 4 out of 5 for practicality. And in terms of how it can benefit your training, I would say it opens a whole new door of opportunities for you to track different kind of metric that can really tell how hard you are training. And so I mentioned just now, with time, you are able to track your training hours, and that is why you are able to measure the volume of the training that you're doing. And with power meter, one more thing that you can track is actually the intensity of your workout. When you figure out how to calculate these sort of different calculations with a power reading, you will be able to precisely track what you're doing and how your training is going. Now at the end of the day, all these are tools to help make sure you can track your training precisely, and with a precise input you get a precise outcome. Because don't get me wrong, you can definitely train without a Garmin head unit or without any of this measurement that I mentioned just now. You're basically just rolling the dice and hope for the best. I'm gonna go out today, I'm gonna go all out, full gas, hope for the best. There's nothing to actually justify and to keep you accountable on how hard you're actually going. And so that is why if you're looking to take your training seriously, you're looking to race, I think it's very, very important to have something like this, a Garmin head unit, power meter, to actually track your training. Without a shadow of a doubt, I'm gonna rank power in S tier. Many of you would probably have guessed it already. And that is all I really have to share for this video, just ranking different types of metrics based on how practical they are and how they can benefit your training. So if you're someone who's a little bit newer to cycling, I hope this video had cleared some doubts and probably some misconceptions on some of the metrics that people use in order to track their training. And before I forget, I recently created a new TikTok account sharing again cycling tips and tricks, but in a much more trendier format. And again, I created a new Instagram account to get a bit of insight to what my training looks like and my daily life looks like. So 2 of the links will be down in the description below. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel for more cycling related tips and tricks.